You wake up on the rooftop of a ruined building in the very heart of Shinjuku. The first thing you feel is not fear, but an absolute, ringing numbness. Your body is splayed out on the cold, weathered concrete, beneath a leaden sky where heavy, unnaturally dense clouds crawl, blocking every ray of sunlight. The Tokyo you remembered, noisy, bright, and endless, has vanished, replaced by a skeleton of steel and stone. You push yourself up on your elbows as a sharp gust of wind, carrying the scent of ozone, charcoal, and wet dust, makes you shiver. Your old hoodie feels as thin as paper, offering no warmth at all. Below, in the deep canyons of the streets, a different, alien life is teeming. There are no cars, no hurrying clerks with umbrellas. Only thick, viscous shadows flow from one alley to another like living black tar. Occasionally, the silence is shattered by blinding flashes of magical energy, lighting up the ruins with toxic green and deathly purple light. Suddenly, you hear a sound. The scrape of claws against rusted metal. You freeze, afraid to even breathe. From behind a massive, corroded ventilation shaft, something slowly rolls out. It is small, about the size of a dog, but its shape shifts constantly as if it cannot decide what creature it wants to be. Where a face should be, two perfectly round emerald eyes glow, and below them is a thin white line of teeth frozen in a grotesque, unnatural grin. The curse freezes, locking its unblinking gaze on you. It makes a sharp, jerky leap, instantly closing the distance. You scramble back, your palms sliding over icy concrete grit. Your heart beats so hard it feels as if it will break your ribs. You feel utterly defenseless, like prey trapped in a corner at the edge of the world. And at the very moment the creature coils for its final leap, the air beside you suddenly thickens. Don't close your eyes. Look death in the face, or it will kill you from behind, a calm, terrifyingly low voice says. Right in front of you, as if out of thin air, a man in a strict dark uniform appears. This is Kai. He doesn't look frightened, he doesn't even draw a weapon. He simply holds out his palm, relaxed and confident. The space in front of his hand distorts, as if the air has instantly turned into transparent crystal. The curse slams into this invisible barrier at full speed and flies back with a guttural shriek, tumbling across the roof. Kai slowly turns his head toward you. In his deep dark eyes, there isn't a drop of pity, only a cold, almost surgical assessment of your state. If you want to survive in this new world, he says, learn to observe. Your fear is not just an emotion. It is fuel for them. It is a signal they can hear from miles away. If you don't learn to control your fear, they will devour your mind before their claws ever touch your flesh. Remember this if you want to see tomorrow's sunrise. Thus began your new life, or rather, a long and painful rebirth. The next 3 years became a test not of your muscles, but of your will and mind. The Magic Academy was a place where time flowed differently. It was a fortress built on strict hierarchy, ancient rules, and absolute discipline. While your peers in the old world were preparing for university exams, you learned to distinguish 40 shades of magical background by the smell and vibration of the air. Your daily life consisted of a routine that at first seemed meaningless and even humiliating. You carried heavy oak crates filled with rare, sometimes foul-smelling ingredients to the infirmary. There, you saw the underside of this war. Sorcerers whose bodies were mutilated by curses, moaning in delirium while their wounds glowed with a faint, putrid light. You carried ancient scrolls wrapped in coarse leather and sealed with heavy wax stamps of long-vanished clans. Kai taught you the main rule, never give in to temptation. Curiosity without sufficient strength is the fastest way to sign your own death warrant. You felt the knowledge inside those scrolls pulsing like a living heart, but you kept your hands behind your back. You sat for hours, sometimes deep into the night, crouching in the shadows of the training halls. You were a ghost. You watched the senior masters fight. Your gaze didn't chase the bright flashes or special effects. You learned to look deeper. You watched how the mages distributed their weight on their feet, how they took a barely noticeable breath before releasing their internal energy. You studied the mechanics of summoning Shikigami, how a drop of blood or a short gesture gave birth to guardian spirits. You learned to see lies and bluffs. In the academy, there were those who artificially inflated their aura to seem formidable, and those who, like Kai, hid true, crushing power behind simple posture and worn clothes. By 19, you yourself had become like a shadow among shadows, a quiet, unnoticeable, yet all-observing instrument. You learned to understand that in the world of magic, caution is valued far higher than reckless courage. Your first real, field mission happened on a rainy October night in the Shibuya district. The air there was so saturated with the smell of ozone and burning that it felt thick like syrup. A group of 5 sorcerers, including yourself, moved slowly through narrow alleys cluttered with mountains of trash, broken storefronts, and torn high-voltage wires sparking in the puddles. You walked last, in the rear guard, responsible for making sure no one attacked the group from behind. Suddenly, the magical pressure around you jumped so sharply that your ears popped and a knot of nausea rose in your throat. It was the aura of a curse. From the walls of the buildings, as if through oil, level 2 creatures began to seep out. These were massive, ugly beings resembling giant spiders but with the faces of crying infants. And they didn't just roar, they whispered. Each curse insidiously shouted your most secret fears: you are here by accident, your mentors will abandon you, you will die in this filth, and no one will remember your name. The mentors instantly engaged in battle. The air filled with the whistle and roar of spells. You saw Kai create dozens of ghostly illusions, confusing the monsters and forcing them to strike empty air. But there were too many enemies. A huge, slime-covered paw of a curse crashed down on one of your fellow students, knocking him down and pinning him to the wet asphalt. The beast had already raised its claws for a fatal blow, and the mentors were tied up in combat with other monsters. At that moment, the world slowed down for you. Fear hadn't disappeared, but it stopped being the master. You remembered every movement of the sorcerers in the training hall. You didn't think about victory, you thought about mechanics. Your fingers wove themselves into a complex, symmetrical seal you had practiced thousands of times in the darkness of your room. Spark barrier, you exhaled, putting all your will into the words. A thin blue sphere, looking like a soap bubble woven from electrical discharges, flared up around your wounded ally. The monster's paw slammed into the barrier, shattering into a spray of blinding sparks. Your shield was weak and lasted only 2 seconds before popping, but that time was enough for Kai to make a lightning-fast dash and take off the monster's head with one precise strike. When the battle quieted, and you stood among the smoking remains of the monsters, breathing heavily and feeling your knees tremble, you finally realized, your true strength is not in the ability to destroy mountains. Your strength is in perfect tactical intuition and control of the moment. Kai looked at you through the veil of rain and gave a barely noticeable nod. It was worth all the years of training. By 22, you were no longer perceived as just a student. In the corridors of the academy, they began to talk about you as the one who sees the structure of being. Your new mission was much more serious: an abandoned warehouse of ancient artifacts on the outskirts of Tokyo's industrial zone. This place had been seized by a level 3 curse, a creature ancient and cunning. It didn't just kill. It distorted the very space inside the huge building, turning it into a nightmare labyrinth. Your allies, young and ambitious sorcerers, nervously gripped the hilts of their swords and amulets. They were physically stronger than you, but confusion was written in their eyes. In this labyrinth, their muscles were useless. They involuntarily turned to you, waiting for a command. Listen to me carefully, your voice, which had become dry and hard over the years, cut through the silence of the warehouse. We will not attack it head-on. We are in its territory, and it feels our every move through the vibrations of the floor. You saw this warehouse differently than the others. Your trained magical vision worked like an X-ray, highlighting weak nodes in the monster's defense. You saw a rusted support beam under the ceiling that was held up by a thread. You noticed an exposed high-voltage cable sparking in a pool of black magical essence. You weren't going to fight fair. When the monster, a colossus of hundreds of intertwined, mutilated limbs, rushed at you from the darkness with a deafening roar, you did not flinch. You gave a series of sharp, clipped commands. One sorcerer struck the beam support with a spell, another hit the distribution board. You folded your fingers in a summoning gesture and released your first Shikigami, a shadow raven. The bird soared under the vaults of the warehouse, transmitting the enemy's position to your mind in real time. You became the eyes and the brain of this group. The curse, accustomed to mindless attacks, found itself trapped by its own scenery. It thrashed about, getting tangled in the debris, until you delivered a final, pinpoint strike, directing all your energy straight into the core of its aura. When the warehouse shook from the creature's death wail and the dust began to settle, you realized, you were no longer an instrument. You were the one holding the instrument in your hands. Years flew by, leaving a few scars on your face and that cold wisdom in your eyes that only comes to those who have seen death too closely. At 28, you took the post of chief strategist of the academy. Your battlefield had changed radically. Now it was a spacious, dimly lit office with a huge holographic table in the center. On it pulsed a living, constantly changing map of Tokyo. You no longer ran through dirty alleys, but every movement of your finger on this map decided which of the young kids would return to the barracks today and who would be left lying in the ruins. You developed a new doctrine of defense based on the psychology of fear. You learned to use domain expansion, the highest manifestation of the magical art. Your domain was called Golden Grid of Creation. It was a surreal arena woven from shining geometric patterns, where you became the absolute law. Within this space, you could change the density of oxygen, the direction of gravity, and even the speed of time for your enemies. But the greater the power became, the heavier the burden on your shoulders. You saw fear and awe in the eyes of new students and realized that you had become the same unreachable and frightening mentor Kai once was for you. You often wondered, did that frightened boy from the rooftop still live within you, or had magic finally pushed out the human? At 35, you were officially granted the title of Archmage, one of the 5 pillars on which the balance of the world rested. You sat in the massive chair of the Council of Elders. Your cloak, decorated with complex gold embroidery, became a symbol of hope for some and a death sentence for others. You ruled from the deep shadows, coordinating hundreds of combat groups across the globe. You knew the contents of every forbidden scroll, every loophole in the city's barriers. You were at the peak of your power. But on one ordinary evening, the world suddenly went quiet. The magical instruments in your office began to emit a steady, frighteningly low hum, and then, one by one, they simply turned off. The lamps went out, plunging the academy into primeval darkness. You stepped out onto the balcony, and your heart, which seemed to have long forgotten how to beat with fear, skipped a pulse. On the horizon, right above the ruined Shinjuku district, the sky itself began to tear like old cloth. From a huge rift oozing darkness, something appeared. A giant eye consisting of an infinite number of broken black lines and emitting an unbearable, consuming black glow. The aura of this creature was so heavy that you physically felt the Academy's ancient barriers begin to crack and crumble like dry plaster. Your hands, adorned with rings of ancient power, trembled slightly for the first time in decades. You gripped your crystal staff so hard that your knuckles turned white. You looked at this chthonic deity and understood. Everything that came before, the rooftop, the scrolls, the endless training, and tactical maps, was just a prelude. This was not just another mission. This was the finale of everything. You took a deep, slow breath, suppressing the trembling and controlling your fear, as Kai had taught you many, many years ago. Around your fingers, the first golden sparks of your final domain began to dance. Well then, you whispered into the ominous void, let's see if this universe has enough strength to break my balance. The screen of your consciousness slowly fades, plunging you into silence before the start of the greatest storm this world has ever seen. End of Season 1.